Our flags, big flags.
Because
Are making me go dizzy.
is it none? All right. We are good.
All right. Somewhat delayed, but greetings to everybody. It's another night for Stump of Stars. Those of you who are here along with us in the room, as well as those who are with us in real time. What are we on? Are we on WebEx for this?
Yes.
And as well as those who join us on other venues today at the Eagle Events. So, with all that being said,
Okay.
Sure. Does that mean I'm gonna have to do it at the end?
if you remind me,
Avinu Malchino, our Father and our King, we thank you and praise you that we reached this evening, that you have guided us and protected us thus far. We pray that you would help us all this evening, that we would learn from your word, that we would get insights that maybe we haven't had before, and that we would continue to be open to your teaching. Thank you for all you do for us every day. Shem Yeshua, Special King.
Amen. Okay. What we thought we would do tonight is, in keeping with many of the questions that came in, that related to basically this being Passover season, as well as what we just went through, that company's name, show up. For those of you who joined us last night, you will recall that the Josh was on a very important question, or a series of questions related to where was God during the Holocaust, or something along that lines. I wanted to build on that, and then we will deal with some of the questions that came in related to Passover. But since the most current thing was Yom HaShoah, I thought we'd start with that. As I mentioned last night during the drash, I was only going to begin to touch on parts of some of the questions as to where was God during this horrible time. And I mentioned that a longer or a more thorough approach to that is in the article I wrote many years ago called God After the Holocaust, an attempted reconciliation that occurred it appeared in the Jewish Journal. I needed to tell you it was a Jewish journal. The journal's name is Judaism, so you really needed to hear. We need to describe it further for you that it's a Jewish journal. Anyhow, with all that being said, we also deal with it in the apologetics course in a little more detail than I did last night, and more detail than I will share with you now. But what I wanted to do was to share with you two different midrashim that related to this subject, and then I wanted to share with you how should I put it? A very brief statement from Spinoza, a Jewish philosopher of years long by, then a cute poem that many are familiar with for its variation, and then finally share with you a poem that Joe Cook found just yesterday as he was doing some browsing. So this will by no means answer the question, but hopefully will provide some insights into this whole commemoration that we call Yom HaShoah. Okay, first of the two midrashim goes like this. Moses, and I've shared this with you in certain situations in the past, so for some of you, you will recall this. Moses once sat near a well in meditation. A traveler stopped to drink from the well, and when he did so, his money bag fell from his belt into the sand. The man departed. Shortly afterwards, another man passed near the well, saw the bag, and picked it up, and went on. Later, a third man stopped to quench his thirst and then went to sleep in the shade of the well. Meanwhile, the first man had discovered that his money bag was missing, and assuming that he must have lost it at the well, he returned. He woke the sleeper, who of course knew nothing, and demanded his money back. An argument followed, and being very angry, the first man killed the third man. Whereupon Moses said to God, "You see why people do not believe in you? There is too much evil and injustice in the world. Why should the first man have lost his bag and then become a murderer? Why should the second man have gotten a huge bag full of money, full of gold, without having to work for it? The third was completely innocent. Why was he killed?" God answered, "For once and only once I will give you an explanation, but I will not do it at every step. The first man was a thief's son. The bag contained money stolen by his father from the father of the second man, who, finding the bag, only found what was due him. The third man was a murderer whose crime has never been revealed, and who received from the first the punishment he rightly deserved. Now, in the future, believe that there is sense and justice in what transpires, even when you do not understand." And then someone was added at the bottom. In other words, faith in God is the sole answer to the mystery of suffering. So that was the rabbi's approach, one of the rabbi's approaches in dealing with that. There's another approach that's not unrelated, and that's in the story of Rabbi Akiva, right? And it relates to the saying, "Gamzu letovah," meaning this too is for the best. Stories about Rabbi Akiva. He looks for a place to spend the night, but nobody in town gives him a place for lodging. And so he says, "This is for the best," or in Hebrew, "Gamzu letovah." At night, in the outskirts of the town, Rabbi Akiva camped out. His candle blows out, and he says, "This too is for the best." An animal kills his rooster, and Rabbi Akiva says, "Gamzu letovah," this too is for the best. Another wild animal kills his donkey, and Rabbi Akiva once again says, as by now you're ready, "Gamzu letovah." The next morning, he learns that during the night, the town was under attack. Had Rabbi Akiva been given lodging, he might have been harmed. Had the candle not gone out, had the rooster not been killed, had the donkey not been killed, they might have made noises. Rabbi Akiva might then have been seen or detected by the attackers and been killed by them. Gamzu letovah, this too is for the best. We don't have all the facts at all the times. We don't know the stories behind the stories, and we therefore don't have all the information. Building on this, Spinoza said the following: God possesses infinite attributes to an infinite degree, of which we know only a few, and these only imperfect. So I think all of that helps us to get a perspective on trying to deal with questions that often are very difficult to answer, and perhaps in some sense don't really have a full answer, unless you read my article. Now, here's a gentle reminder based on a poem that you may very well be aware of. It's
I like this poem a lot.
yeah. She is not as fond of the original as she is of this.
No, because the original is
So-
splurge. The definition of splurge. Splurge is an internet term for when something is so sickly sweet, it makes your teeth rot in your mouth because it's too much sweetness and gig. Like instead of saying, "Oh, I love you, you're great," you say, "Oh, my darling, you are the sweetest thing that ever entered my," that's splurge.
I'm not.
Has yet to be.
Okay. This is called Footprints 2.0. I just made that up.
I like it.
Yeah, it just came to me. I don't know why.
Very internet, yeah.
Okay. One night I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen, the footprints of my precious Lord. But mine were not along the shore. But then some strange prints did appear, and I asked the Lord, what have we here? Oh Lord, they are too big for me. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused in being faith. You disobeyed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired, I got fed up, and there I dropped you a whisper. Because in life there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb, when one must rise and take a stand, or leave their butt in the sand.
6. Where's we gonna live by?
It says it very well.
Only, I think only, well, especially people who've had to deal with small children really have a whole level of meaning.
Okay. And then this is something that Joe found. As I said, this was something that was written anonymously on the wall of our church. All farewell, my friends. Farewell, my friends. I go to death for God. My innocent blood will touch his heart. May it awaken the world through passion and justice. Let no one say, I did not know. We knew. The smoke knew. The sky knew. The silence knew. Very well said. Yes, I remark. Yes. We have discovered more recently that there were some 42,000 plus ghettos, camps, and campers. People knew, and it was up to them to do something. And unfortunately, most. There were some, and those are enshrined, is that the best term?
They're commemorated.
Commemorated, okay. In the
Yeah,
garden, yes, in Yad Vashem, garden
of the righteous.
of the righteous, thank you.
And, yeah, where they each have a tree planned for them. When the state of Israel learns about a Gentile that has purportedly saved Jews during that time period, there's a whole process of verifying. They have to have a certain number of people attest to what the person did. In other words, it isn't just my uncle saved Jews. It's what they had to research. And but to me, the most shocking thing is because of everyone out here, you're adorable, but many Christians think that there were Corrie ten Booms all over. Every street corner had a Corrie ten Boom, and all you had to do was say, I need help, and you get hidden and you get saved. But they're just more it. And your parents, one time I said to John Smith, well, were there any Gentiles who helped you? Big long pause. They looked at each other. No. And then Pop said, well, you could give money to a Gentile and that might help you. So they could be bought. The amazing thing about Yad Vashem, which you don't get when you first go there, because you see some trees, they're very nice, they're various stages of growth. There's just not that many. Maybe 100 at most. I don't even think that. Out of all of Europe,
And remember the story that I shared last night, Michael talked about. What he did. He was just yet another example. I don't know that he had. Remember. Yeah, they would be stories of people like that. These are the stories just because they stand out against the greater environment. Something else. Yes, as I said last night, the Holocaust is not so much of a dilemma, but it's a dilemma And that's why you had those sets of titles I showed. Wild 60. People were unfortunate. And those who were helped passed.
I was gonna say, and then you have Americans who say, it wasn't us, we weren't there.
And part of wild system. How should I put it? It describes what could have been done, but wasn't done, even by those 94. People who knew about things going on in shows now. As the Jewish catalog, the dilemma so much about. So that doesn't answer all the questions, but it does remind us very clearly God made Adam and Eve. He needed us to be humans, not robots. As humans, we have choices that we get to make, and he allows us to make those choices because were he not to allow them to make those choices, we would no longer be free. So that too is part of the problem. As humans, we have choices to make, decisions to make, or we choose to ignore pain and hurt of those around us. And I think that's partly or perhaps in response to that, to the nature of what we is why the Torah spends so much time.
Just trying to reposition that.
Okay. Why the Torah spends so much time throughout these many pages to remind us that we are supposed to look out for those who are disenfranchised, the way we call it now, the disenfranchised, the underdogs, the outcasts. Biblical text describes, depending on the translation, the foreigners or the aliens. And by aliens, we're not talking about the time we encountered the Doctor Who last night, but those from outside.
It looks like Barbara's holding up her hand.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm having sound issues. Some of what Dr. Fisher is saying, I'm not hearing it all. And it's almost like there's a background echo over the whole thing.
Me too.
Oh, not good.
I'm not having much clarity. You're going in and out.
Speaker, microphone.
I said the same, I text you.
Texted the same thing, yeah.
Privately.
This one's trying to reposition the mic. Is it any better?
How about now? Are we doing any better with it?
Nice.
That sounds
That's a
better to me.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, I'm half tempted to go back through these because if they were garbled, people are not going to understand them. I don't know what else to say.
I don't know what else to say.
It switched some setting around because I had everything pointed to the right device, but it flipped
It
devices.
flipped
off.
devices and that's why it happened.
So I switched it back. I don't know why it.
Is there anything you want?
The
Go
two
ahead.
things that I really couldn't hear very well were the poems.
Oh,
Because we were missing parts of the poems as it was going in and out. And so you couldn't really track what it was saying.
okay, so he can do the poems again.
Okay, now let me ask the question. But did you hear the two midrashim?
2 stories.
The
at
two
the beginning.
stories, Moses and
Yes,
Akiva?
yes.
Okay,
So I'd
And
heard
did
them
you-
before, so I could
Yeah.
follow that easier.
okay, how about the one about Moses is kind of complex.
Mhm.
How about Spinoza? Did that come through clearly? Okay, good. All right, in that case,
He can read
I'll read the two poems.
the not footprints one.
Well, that was one of the ones.
I know. Doesn't.
Oh, I see. I see. Yes. I misunderstood what you said. Okay, so here we go again. Because of,
Speak up, sit up
yes,
straight.
because the audio got garbled. I'll redo Footprints 2.0. One night I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen, the footprints of my precious Lord, but mine were not along the shore. But then some strange prints did appear, and I asked the Lord, what have we here? Oh Lord, they are too big for feet. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused and made me wait. You disobeyed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired, I got fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because in life there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb. When one must rise and take a stand or leave their butt print in the sand. Okay, and then the poem that was written anonymously on the wall of a barrack in Auschwitz. Farewell, my friends. Farewell, my friends. I go to death for God. My innocent blood will touch his heart. May it awaken the world to compassion and justice. Let no one say I did not know. We knew, the smoke knew, the sky knew, the silence knew. In other words, people knew, and people did not do. Also, a couple extra lines
Very
for the
cool.
poem. You like? All right. Okay. Any questions? I know we did not answer this fully, but any questions on what we did talk about? Bottom line, Holocaust is not a dilemma about God. It's a dilemma about people and their, if not lack of concern, certainly lack of involvement. Okay, then.
We're
First,
going to start with one of the questions that was.
yep. Passover related question. Starts out by saying, Shabbat Shalom. I hope this reaches you in time for another question. And it did. Not by much, but it did. In Exodus 12:48.
It was this morning. She sent it this morning.
Yes. In Exodus 12:48, no uncircumcised person shall eat of the Passover. And in the New Testament, we are taught there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. We are grafted in. How does this affect the directive in Exodus? Also, is it that thought, well, pardon me, also, is that thought possibly partly behind the circumcision of new Gentile believers debate in Acts 15? Thank you in advance.
What?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Okay. No,
Okay,
don't make them keep waiting.
all right. Do you want to start the answer?
No, I don't. Do you want to start the answer, Mr. New Testament guy?
Well, we started with Exodus 12, that's why I said.
No circumcised person shall eat of the Passover. Yes, I knew that. Maybe that's surprising to some people. It does say that. I would just I could kick off this discussion by saying something that many people are not aware of. But remember when the Jewish people left Egypt, when the children of Jacob, they left Egypt. It wasn't just the children of Jacob. It says very clearly in the text, there were some Egyptians who chose to leave with the people who left in a hurry that day. Remember, they left in a hurry. And there were some who went with them that were Egyptians and were not Jewish. And yet 45 years later, when they show up in the promised land, they're all Jews. What on earth happened? What on earth happened? It's interesting, isn't it? There's got to be an explanation, although I've never heard anybody talk about it. Well, I'm not gonna give
Yeah,
it
go-
now.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I
Yeah,
mean,
go ahead,
right.
because that's a very important part of this.
so what happened? Well, sometime they became Jewish. What? What? They became Jewish. Uh-huh. Even though there was no classes, that we know of, there was no lectures, there were no books that they read about it. Somehow the Egyptians that left with them were adopted into the Jewish people. At that point, please remember that there is not a whole set of beliefs and rituals and laws written down. So becoming Jewish at that point was what you and I would more or less, there was no indoctrination, there was nothing, they had to read the piece of paper and sign their name to it. None of that existed. So the emphasis was more on who you identified with and what you did together, more about the ethos and less about the signing your name on a dotted line. And so presumably the families, remember, these are family units that left Egypt. And while they're spending that time in the wilderness, they weren't lost. And to quote a very old joke, they were not looking for a quarter. They were not wandering. Why am I saying that? Everybody says they wandered and they were lost and they didn't know what they were doing and what a mess. And so Moses was the only person who was smart and he was the one. Yeah. Once again, who was leading them? Moses only gets you half credit. Who is leading Moses?
God.
Yes, very clear. She said God. The cloud during the day and the pillar of fire at night. So who's leading the people? The cloud and the pillar. Okay. Does he know where he's going? Yes. Are they lost because they're goofy and they've sinned so much? Because this is the way it's usually presented. I'm going off in a tangent now, but
The important tension.
So during this time, you have groups of family. Remember, they even pitch their tents in family groups because tribes are just extended family groups. When you think about it, when we say tribes, then people don't think about families. No, this is families. These are families and they all interrelate. And there were rules about who got to, in other words, if a woman from one tribe married a man from another tribe, then what happened? Oh, no, what are we going to do? Well, they had ways of dealing with that too, because all 12 tribes show up in the promised land after half a decade and they're there. The Egyptians, I think, would either marry into a family and be adopted by that family or just be adopted by a family and fit in that way because there was nobody without a tribe described in any of the literature. There were no almost Jews that were having their own tribe. That didn't happen. They were all part of the larger plan, and all those diagrams that are in the back of your Christian Bible about that this is where this tribe was and this is where this tribe was, and then when they marched, this is the order. Which, did you ever see those? Do you ever look at those? Yeah, it's a big deal for whoever developed those charts thinks it's a big deal. But the important thing is there's nobody left behind, because remember, to leave the group. What if you said, I am sick and tired of this group. I just don't like any of the leadership. I'm gonna find somewhere else. What would happen? I think it's probably certain death.
Yeah.
I think it's probably certain death. And I think if you're used to watching old Westerns, like from the 1950s or 40s, where so the cowboys, or even some of the TV shows, so the group of cowboys or the posse are getting thirsty, their canteens are dry, and so they see some water bubbling up over there, and so they go over to the bubbling water up and they go, oh, good, we'll fill up our canteens. And then what do they see? Oh, a skeleton, don't they? They see a skeleton and they see dead animals. And so what do they know? Don't drink that water. I would bet the mortgage money that those things happened in the Sinai also, especially when they're going closer to the seas. When you have a disturbance in the Earth's crust, then things come up from the underground. And although you want to think it's very, very nice, cool, fresh water, it could be deadly. So that's what happened in the old timey Westerns. And I think it's based on what actually happens when you are stuck in the desert. You're looking for anything you can find. Is that fair enough?
Mhm.
So how did I get on that? It was very important.
People
Oh,
connecting.
they had to stay together. You couldn't wander off by yourself and go look for another town because you didn't like the people there. I didn't care for, we had too much manna and I was done with the manna. So I decided to go to the Long Branch Saloon and have a few drinks. It didn't happen. You stayed with them or you were probably dead. Therefore, so there's some Egyptians who left. 50 years later, nobody's Egyptian anymore. They're all Jewish people. And I think that is not a problem to be solved. I think that's an example to be looked at and to ask the questions, what happened then? Now, part of what happened then, we assume, and we're not going to say for sure, because there seems to be a wrinkle in the force. No, that's not the right metaphor. There seems to be a disturbance in the force about this circumcision thing. Because evidently at this time period, circumcision was not something Egyptians did. I'm not saying that they didn't do it later on. I'm saying at this point, evidently circumcision was not part of the Egyptian way of life. So whether or not all these Jews had their boys circumcised, we can question. Maybe some did, maybe some didn't. Maybe they taught about it, maybe they didn't teach about it. In every non-Jewish culture, there's always a discussion about, should we circumcise or should we not? In America, starting in the, I'm going to say in the 19th century, it was common practice for Americans to circumcise their babies, whether they were Jewish or not. This became part of the public health program. It was, everybody did it unless there was a specific reason not to. And then like with the newborn, if the newborn is having some kind of distress or some exhibiting a problem, they're not going to circumcise them. But when the boy got old enough, they would circumcise him later on, probably still as a baby and probably still not in their remembrance. But we're weird. America's weird. I don't even know if it extended to Canada. I wouldn't want to say anything about Canada about that. But I do know in America, this is true. Why am I bringing that up? Because in Europe, during the Holocaust, that was one way where they could tell if somebody was Jewish or not. Oh, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Jewish. Well, if you're a guy, guess what they're going to do? And they did it. They pulled down guys' pants to see if they were circumcised. And if you were circumcised, Jewish. You couldn't do that right now in America. That wouldn't work in America, which makes us a very, very unique country. I don't know if it gives us any advantages or any disadvantages. I'm just saying this is what happened. And we have to consciously understand as Americans that the rest of the world did not do this, and the rest of the world thought it was weird and wrong. And the Greeks, it was shameful to the Greeks. And as John points out, and as I've heard several times from various sources, during the Greek time period, during the Hellenistic time period, there were some Jewish guys who wanted to participate in the Greek wrestling games and in their sports events. And since circumcision, well, first of all, they did this all in the nude. Guys did this all in the nude. And somehow the culture did not fall apart because they saw nude people. I don't know. I can't figure that out. I'm being sarcastic. Victorian times did not help us as a culture at all. Okay, back to the nude guys. So they could see if you were circumcised or not. And so there were some Jewish guys who got uncircumcised. And evidently it was not exactly your run of the mill people, but this was something that you would choose to do if you wanted to fully participate in these Greek games. Your theology on that, I'll leave you to debate. I don't think we have enough knowledge to debate that, but it's just an example of how that was a not cool thing for the rest of the world. And they thought it was weird, and it marked the Jewish people. Girls are trickier. Aren't we always trickier? Yes, we are. But Americans have a somewhat skewed idea about how common it is in the whole world. It really isn't common. And in most of the world, looked down upon and thought to be strange and unnecessary at the best. How did I get onto this? Oh, so we're talking about this. No uncircumcised person shall eat of the Passover. Who are the uncircumcised people there? Well, it could be about anybody in the wilderness, because as I said, did the people in Goshen, remember, all the Jewish people lived in Goshen, which is around the Nile Delta. They lived in Goshen, short story, because cattle people, cow people, which is what the Egyptians were, do not mix with sheep people, which is what the Jewish people were. If you watch more old Western movies, the cattle people and the sheep people do not get along. One of them wants things to be penned and fenced off, and the other one cannot stand those fences and the barbed wire and everything. One of them the cattle need to be able to roam, and the sheep need to be penned in. So those two groups of people have different needs, and so it's better to separate, even in America in the 1800s. And that's what you see. The land of Goshen was where the sheep were. That's where the most grass was for the sheep, right? And the cow people or the cattle people were more in the south. So you've got some Egyptians plus Jewish people who go into the wilderness. What percentage of these people were circumcised? There is no way to know. What? I thought all Jewish people by definition were circumcised because that came down with Abraham, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I know. Except there's that little story right after they leave Egypt, where Zipporah has a little tiny discussion with her husband about their son. And if you have read your Bible carefully, probably not in Sunday school, they don't read this story in Sunday school, where they're stopped. And we're not going to discuss that topic, but we will probably the next time we meet.
Yeah, because it was one of the questions.
It's one of the questions. Ironically and coincidentally.
Yeah.
It's bridegroom of blood. We'll let you read it on your own and see if you can come up with something. Evidently not, because not even Moses' son was circumcised. And who called him out on it? His wife. We didn't think she was Jewish, did we? No, she doesn't come from Egypt, does she? She comes from another area. So how come she knows Judaism better than, at that point, better than Moses? What happened? What's up with that? And where was Moses raised? Pharaoh's house. When did he get sent to Pharaoh's house? As a newborn.
Well, and then
As a newborn. So he's put in the basket. Is he circumcised yet? Probably not. Or if he was, that would be a
Yeah.
matter of shame. So let's cover that up. Okay, cover that up about my son. Let's not bring up the topic. That's a very unpleasant topic. Get you labeled as, it's not a good label. For what, do we know if Moses was circumcised or not? No, we don't. Do we know if he circumcised his son? Oh, no, we do know that. And he didn't. these are things we never talk about in our circles because they're slightly unpleasant. Was it your brother? So one time they were having a discussion about this at the Fisher household. I'm telling you, those guys were nuts. And your brother didn't know what the difference was. He didn't, he had no, well, you know, he was born and raised in the 50s. You didn't talk about penises in the 50s, except his family. When they got older, they did talk about them. He didn't know what the difference. And I would say if you gave a test to the next 100 women who are walking in and out of Target here, and you said, what's the difference between someone who's been circumcised and someone who hasn't? I bet half of them flunk. I don't think women don't talk about it either. And they don't talk about what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. They just don't talk about that. It's very shameful. Nobody needs to know about that stuff because it's evil. Are you agreeing with me?
Mhm.
He's so cute. Is that the kind of thing you wanted me to talk about? So
that's
when you ask this initial question, it says, no uncircumcised person shall eat of the Passover. Okay, who does this apply to is the bottom question. How many percentage people does this apply to of those who went into the wilderness? We don't know. We assume it's a minority, especially if we haven't read the Bible carefully. We assume that everybody who was Abraham's descendants, Egypt is a different category than the Arabs. So on the Arab Peninsula, the Muslims also circumcise. They circumcised at the same, in their minds, at the same time that Isaac was circumcised.
Ishmael.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Slicha. Ishmael was circumcised as a 12-year-old. And so within the Arab communities, guess how old you are when you're circumcised? 12. And it's a time of celebration. Why does nobody ever discuss these things? It's a time of great celebration, and the boy is put on a horse or a camel and celebrate, and people cheer and everything. Yes, and this is a celebration, which once again, Americans have no clue what's going on in other nations of the world. But that's true. So the Arabic Peninsula did go along with circumcision, but Egypt, remember, is a different civilization. Yeah.
But remember, Islam does not come about until the 7th century. So that is 600 years after Yeshua.
600 years after Yeshua.
So the Arabs weren't circumcising at this particular time.
No, but they did, and they do now.
Yeah.
But it's at age 12. It's a really good time in a kid's life. Anyway, so when we talk about no uncircumcised person shall eat of the Passover, I just want to say this one little unrelated. Well, it's related to the whole concept. The definition behind this would apply to men or everyone who has a penis. Those of us who do not have a penis, I submit to you that women, it doesn't hit women the same. It just doesn't affect us the same way. So one time I did give a sermon in our synagogue. You were not there. This was back when you made me give the sermon every time you went out of town.
Mhm.
So at one point I gave a sermon and
Well, by the way, which is why she now goes out of town every time I go out of town.
no, maybe. Well, he doesn't, my point is he never heard me talk until about 10 years ago. He would always miss out on my sermons. And he wasn't in any of my classes. I used to be in all of his classes. And then, you know, I got busy and plus I'd heard those. Now his classes are totally different, but I haven't heard. Anyway, back to my topic, which is how do women see circumcision? We think of it as like, that must be terrible. It's like, tell men about childbirth. Yeah, that's bad. Childbirth, very painful. Meanwhile, women are going, I don't want to remember. So women feel the same way about circumcision. We're going, yeah, that must be very hard and interesting process, but it just doesn't hit us. So when we read about circumcision, uncircumcision, blah, 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 we're just going, we've got it. All right, what does it mean to me? Because none of this applies to me. How do I perceive it? We're not even going to talk about the procedure that they do in some nations where they call it a circumcision, but it is not, it's mutilation. So we're going to set that aside. We're just going to go, how does this apply to me in 21st century America? How can I identify with all these verses that talk about what happens when you're circumcised? And when I did some study on it, I determined that what we're supposed to understand being circumcised or uncircumcised is a representation of being stubborn and hard-hearted, because the metaphor is that circumcision creates more feeling in the penis. And so having a circumcised heart means you've created more feeling in your heart, that your heart is not hardened anymore, but it's tender. It's willing to listen and not just poo-poo everything, but it's ready to hear what God has to say. And I think that's the more of the theological understanding of what circumcision often is talking about when the verses come up. And it's a very interesting and good way to understand. Therefore, women should read it like we're getting the metaphor. Men are just wincing and not even listening, but women are going, so that does apply to me. If I have a hard heart, if I'm too stubborn to listen to God, if I think I know better than God, then my heart needs to be circumcised and become tender and listen and sensitive and all those things. And the men are still wincing, but when they get over wincing and they think about it, you should think about your heart. And do you have the attitude of tenderness? I'm listening to God. I'm not too stubborn. I'm not too stuck on my own opinions, but I'm willing to hear what God has to tell me. That's the value of those verses, rather than just nothingness, rather than does not apply to me kind of thing. I don't know why you allow me to go on and on and on, but actually this question is about no uncircumcised person shall eat the Passover. And go ahead.
Just wanted to say something. What she just said now about the circumcised heart and being sensitive and responsive to needs around you, it would have been the perfect antidote for what happened during the Holocaust. If people had had what you might call circumcised hearts, they might have been more responsive to what was going around. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah. It's so to us in the 21st century, it says no circumcised person shall eat of the Passover. That seems so strict and so mean and so wrong. And so that's just, they exclude these people. Who are the people? Well, first of all, there are all the Egyptians that came, but then there's the other parts of the family that we're not talking about that either. About what percentage then of the Jewish guys are circumcised when they left Egypt. And it's iffy. It is iffy. We don't really know. When they roll a videotape in heaven, I guess we'll find out there. Maybe someone will tell us rather than we have to see. I don't want to see it. Anyway, going back to how do we apply this in Exodus? What does it mean and how do we apply it? And you go with the New Testament.
No, I'm just going to go with, I'm not going to get there yet.
Okay, he's got more to say.
Yeah, and we want to deal with.
Right. We didn't get there yet.
No. All right. Hang on. All right. Why was it important that this celebration be only for those who were circumcised? Well, think about what the Passover was intended to be or what it accomplished. And before that, a new insight jumped into my mind as a result of some of the research we were doing prior to coming here. based on all the questions we gotten. I had completely forgotten that when Moses' mission was launched by God, God had Moses tell Pharaoh, Israel is my firstborn. And if you don't take care of my firstborn, I will take care of your firstborn. That means that the plagues, in one sense, hear it carefully, since that was the initial message to Pharaoh, the plagues, in one sense, each one of them, 9 different times, God gave Pharaoh a chance to avoid his firstborn going.
All the firstborn Egyptians.
Yes. Are you following me? Initial message to Pharaoh. If you don't let my firstborn go, I will do in your firstborn. And then God reminded him and sent a plague. Oh, it's a reminder. Let the people go, or your firstborn are going to get it. Like number 2, let my people go, or your firstborn. You follow? So each of the plagues was leading up to the 10th, which was the initial warning that God gave to Pharaoh, and he gave him all kinds of opportunities to avoid the ultimate. So when you view the plagues in that sense, it becomes lessons, not just judgments, but lessons, and how should we put it? Encouragements to let the firstborn of God go. All right? Now, when God brought his people out of Egypt, what did that signify? Well, it's Exodus 6, 6 and 7. God says, I will take you to be my people when I bring you out of Egypt. So the Passover was a sign that God was making the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, was making those people officially or formally his people, and then he was going to turn them into a nation. So this becomes a celebration of becoming the people of God, becoming ultimately the nation of God, as was formally constituted, and I use that term as in constitutionized, at Shavuot. So this was a celebration specifically for that. If you're not part of the nation, if you're not part of the people of Israel, then this celebration, and it's going to sound pretty blunt here, is not your celebration. If you want it to be your celebration, then become part of the nation. Okay? I see some people are nodding that point's getting across. That's important to understand. So this was not to exclude others, but to encourage others to become part of this community.
You're open to becoming part of the
Yes.
community. It's not like we're not letting you. See, this sounds like they're not letting us do
Yep.
this.
See, it's an invitation, not a
Yeah.
not
No,
being
no.
pushed away.
Yeah.
And as Patrice so very eloquently put it, by the time they got to the Jordan River, most, if not all, had become Jews. I would say most, if not all, because if I remember right, in Deuteronomy 29, when the covenant is renewed at the Jordan, the covenant does include the aliens or the foreigners among you. Now, does that mean that's who they were and then they became circumcised? Or does that mean that they were not circumcised at that time? I'm not sure. But it was always others were invited to become part of and get attached to the community. That's going to become very important in the background to Acts chapter 15, which our questioner brought up. Now, in the Newer Testament, we are taught that there is no difference between Jew and Gentile, right?
That's what it says. That's what it says.
Barb did
Yeah,
this. She's absolutely right.
It depends. It depends.
Galatians chapter 3, I think it's right around verse 27, says there's neither Jew, I think it's there Greek or Gentile. Goes on to say there is neither slave nor free. And yet, Rav Shaul wrote a letter to Philemon to set free one of his servants
Who was a believer.
who was a believer.
They both were believers.
They were both believers, and yet there were slaves and free. Oh, and the last part of Galatians 3 says what? And there's neither male nor female. Is there male and female in the family of God? Oh, yeah. Now, many people misconstrue the differences, and they make the differences not this from that, but this from that. One superior is
Therefore,
many.
one gets to rule and the other one gets to shut up.
So, and if you look at the book of Ephesians, and since this person who raised this question does join us on Friday nights virtually, I would recommend that the person go back and review my various drashim or drashot on Ephesians. Ephesians clearly makes a distinction as well between Jews and Gentiles. And Rav Shaul in Ephesians chapter 3, he's already suggested this in chapter 2, he addresses those who are followers of Yeshua, not as Jews, but still as Gentiles. So even after a relationship with God, there is a difference between Jews and Gentiles. And the verse goes, or the questioner goes on and says, and I'm not knocking the questioner. This person's a very good friend of ours, and I would not put them down in any.
No, this is a good question.
It's a
I think
very good
very,
question.
Very interesting.
It's a very good question because this is a question that's out there and it's misunderstood. Sometimes it's even misunderstood in Messianic circles.
Especially in Messianic circles, frankly.
We are grafted in. Romans chapter 11, grafted in. That has nothing to do with a skin graft.
Ouch.
Ouch is right. It has to do with the agricultural process of wild plants being grafted into natural plants.
Can I tell them why?
Go.
According to my father, the
Yes.
agriculture teacher. If you have roses, if you grow roses in your yard, the odds are good. Once again, I think I'm going to bet the mortgage payment that you have nice roses because they've taken a wild rose root system and they've grafted on cultivated rose stems onto the root system so that that plant can grow without getting every single plant disease under the sun. In other words, having what's called in that case a wild root, giving you beautiful roses that have been cultivated down through the years, is to help the strength and the growth of that rose bush. And that's all a big giant metaphor for this relationship between those that were grafted into the natural root and the natural root. Yeah. There was one fleeting thing that went through my mind. This wouldn't not have been true because they didn't have cultivated roses back in Bible times, but they did have citrus trees. And citrus trees have the same issue. In other words, you need a wild orange or lemon root system, and you graft branches that have more cultivated fruit-giving branches into the wild root. Here's how we know that's true in Florida. What happens when citrus trees freeze during a frost? All right, the branches that you normally pick the fruit off of, they die. But then in the spring, you'll start seeing little tiny green shoots where the orange tree grew or the grapefruit tree. Well, look at that. It didn't die, and that sort of metaphor is in other areas of the scriptures as far as prophecy goes. But here's the thing. So it died back. Some new shoots come out. Oh, wonderful. And it gets to be old enough and it's actually bearing fruit. Now, if I pick fruit off of the new branches that came up after the frost, How will those fruits taste? Will they be just as delicious and yummy as the original tree? Well, it's a crapshoot. It's a gamble. Why? Because the odds are that those fruit that come off of the new tree is going to be inedible. It's going to be so bad and awful that even cattle and animals won't eat those wild citrus fruits. It's disgusting. They have to be plowed into the ground. They're just awful. So, well, what does that mean? Well, that's your natural, let's not carry the metaphor too far, but just so that people up north understand that this is why you have a wild root system, which is very strong, very powerful, usually doesn't care if it gets frozen. But what comes out of that root that's been frozen, is it the new branches that where they have delicious fruit, or is it the old branches which have fruit that's disgusting and inedible? I'm only saying this because one time we had a lemon tree like that in our backyard. His mother comes and she says, "Oh, you got lemons back here." We go, "Mom, don't eat those because they're wild. They came out of this
Because we had
tree."
freeze. Yeah.
Because we had it freeze. It's not gonna be good. So, you couldn't tell her anything. She had to try it herself. She tried it herself. It was funny. It was disgusting. She couldn't. She says, I'm going to give Andy, his sister, her own daughter, some piece of this and watch her face. And she did that. That was like one of the meanest things I ever saw her do. And Andy, his sister, comes out. I'm going, your mom did that. I am so sorry. But anyway, yeah. So this concept of being grafted in is a very powerfully understood metaphor because people were more acquainted with that concept. Here, and we think that bread grows on trees. We just don't have the knowledge. But this thing about grafting in was such a powerful and useful metaphor. Everybody knew that that's what farmers did, and they knew why they did that. So have I over-explained that?
No.
I think it's important because otherwise we get the wrong idea. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to give an example from the north. We grew up, and in our backyard, we planted some trees, including an apple tree.
They're very nice.
And I love this particular apple tree because this apple tree had been, what should we put it, treated so that there had been, in other words, this wasn't just a natural apple tree, been
Apple.
and a natural, apple tree. They had grafted in branches from other kinds of apple trees. So we had an apple tree that bore, I think it was 4 or 5 different fruits.
Kinds of apples.
4 different kinds of apples. Each branch bore its own kind of apple.
So you have a tree, but then it's giving off one branch. I'm just making up a delicious apple. Over here had a Macintosh apple. Over here had a
Yellow apple.
Jonathan apple. No, I don't think you could. I think the yellow would be outside the boundaries, but anything, because the yellow fruit is a whole different.
No, I'm sorry, I mean a green apple.
Agree. Yeah, I still think that would be outside. You'd have to have ones that were similar and would have red parts on them. Anyway, well, if my father's no longer here to ask him, then he would know all about this.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
The point was that each branch bore its own kind of fruit.
Different fruit.
Okay. That comes full circle now, hopefully with a somewhat better understanding of the imagery of the olive trees in Romans chapter 11. The main point there is that the branch does not support the tree. The tree and its roots support the branch. But as with this imagery of grafting, as well as the illustrations that we've just shared with you, be it citrus or be it apple, the branch bears its own kind of fruit. It doesn't bear the fruit of the tree, of the root.
It could. Branches could bear the root, the fruit of the root, but not that tree.
Yeah, the grafted in branches bore the fruit of the tree from which they came. So just to say you're grafted in does not mean you suddenly become
Part
the
of the
tree
root.
or the root.
It's the fruit that proves what you are. Right? Is that fair enough to say?
Correct. And the point is, the fruit of the natural olive and the wild olive are different fruits. So to say you're grafted in doesn't mean you've become the other. You still bear your own kind of fruit. Does that make sense?
There's only so far you can extend this metaphor. As with any metaphor, there's only so far you can push it until, oops, now that extension is not really true, kind of a thing. Is that fair enough to say? Should I tell them what happened when your mother gave me an apple and said, here, take this to your father and he can tell me what kind of problems the tree is having, so I can have the guy who's spraying the apple trees come out and spray for whatever it's gone wrong. And so I took it to my father and he pointed about 10 different diseases or problems that this apple had. And so I came back, I said, yeah, you don't even want to know. She said, that's not helpful. Now what am I supposed to tell the guy to spray this tree for? And I went, just spray it for everything. I don't know. Just he was not thrilled about the health of this apple.
Okay. Also, is that thought possibly partly behind the circumcision of new Gentiles debate in Acts 15? Okay, that thought, the thought being grafted in. I think having just described the grafting process, you could see how that might be related, but is not necessarily related. The issue behind Acts chapter 15 is fairly, at one level, straightforward, and I'll let you interact on this in a moment. I will just say this story.
I'm not sure what.
Because, anyhow, Acts 15,
Go ahead.
God fears the whole business.
I'll try to
anyhow.
pick up on it.
Okay, so here we go. Acts 15, there are some people who are believers as they're wrestling with the idea that more and more Gentiles are becoming part of the family of God. And let's be very clear to set the stage. This relates to somewhat to questions we have answered in the past and we may get back to again in the future. The first believers in Yeshua were all Jews. How do we know? Because everyone who showed up at Shavuot after the resurrection and ascension were Jews who came to Jerusalem to celebrate Shavuot.
Or God-fearers.
Or God-fearers. The people who welcomed Yeshua as the Messiah, and remember we've talked about this before, and on what's called Palm Sunday, they were there to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem. Who comes to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem? Jews. These were the people who recognized Yeshua as the Messiah. And again, remember, they did not reject him. They recognized and received him as the Messiah. The movement was still spreading. And as some historians of that early period said, and if I remember right, the gentleman's name is Bagatti, Church According to Circumcision, the first 100,000 followers of Yeshua were all Jews. Okay? Just to set the background. More and more Gentiles became part of this emerging family of God. In order to become part of the family of God, what was expected? Well, beginning with Abraham, it had to do with the faith and family of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob's kids. That's who became part of the family of God. Circumcision was the outward sign of having joined that family if you were not already part of the family. If you were already part of the family, when you got circumcised, it proved that you were part of the family, at least for the guys. So the assumption, and it seemed to make sense, is, all right, what do these Gentiles need to do to be fully part of the family of God? Well, they need to be circumcised. They need to convert officially to Judaism.
And not just do that one thing, but.
No, yes. Please understand that when this term is used in the biblical text, it doesn't mean just a physical act. It means the whole package
The whole Megillah.
of what we call Judaism. All right. In other words, the one party said, look, it's very reasonable, logical. It makes all the sense in the world. They need to convert it formally to Judaism. And by the way, Rav Shaul did exactly that for Timothy. Well, he had Jewish parentage. If he was not circumcised, he was not a Jew. When he became circumcised, he became formally part of Judaism.
But I just want to point out, that's later. That's 1,000 years, at least later than the situation with Moses. So let's
1,500
make,
years, yeah.
yeah, they're not all Jews, everything Jewish from Abraham on. There's developments in the understanding. Anyway, go ahead.
So anyhow, so you see the logic. But the same rabbi is the one who was one of the group in Jerusalem who said, no, Gentiles don't need to be circumcised. And that's why he didn't circumcise Titus. Why did he circumcise Timothy? Because Timothy was going to identify with the Jewish people as part of the Jewish community. Titus represented a different form of identification. And we talked about this, not this past Thursday, but 2 weeks before in the epistles class. So I'm not going to say anything further than that. Okay, so the question was debated back and forth. And then the resolution came. We do not require that these Gentile followers of the Messiah become circumcised or become Jews. Why? Because the larger message, as understood biblically, was that God was going to call both Jews and Gentiles. He still maintained a distinction between Jews and Gentiles to become part of the family of God. That was going to be part of the promises through Abraham. However, there were certain things that the Gentiles were expected to do. And 4 things are cited. And here's the interesting thing. The 4 things, the requirements that were cited, were exactly the same 4 requirements that were cited in the same order by Rabbi Hillel, who lived a generation before. So basically, to answer the question, these early leaders of the Messianic movement followed the teaching of one of the major teachers of Judaism, and said, that's what Gentiles need to do. What were those 4 things? They were part of what's called the Noahide covenant, which includes 7 things according to the Jewish numbering.
Because the Noahide covenant is widely understood within Judaism. This is how the whole world should operate. It's not just for Jewish people. The Noahide covenant applies to Jews and Gentiles. That's because really Judaism had not even was a thing yet. It was just God or no God. So God says Noahide. So highly recommend that you read what happens after the flood and the agreement that's made between God and Noah and his children.
Okay, and again, you'll understand the logic. Please remember that Abraham comes after Noah. And Moses comes after Abraham.
By a lot.
Okay, now, do you know anyone who's not ultimately a descendant of Noah? Absolutely
We
not.
all are.
We all are.
No matter what color, we're all.
So it made sense then to take this covenant, which applied to all people, to apply it to all those who were not Jews, because the Jews had the covenant through Abraham and then through Moses. Okay? So you can understand why that decision was originally formulated by Hillel, why it made sense to James and the others, to James and to Paul and the others in Acts 15. Do you want to say anything further about that and incorporate God-fearers in while you're at it?
Okay, so I'm not going to explain the whole thing.
No.
But
Before you do, for more on this part, read the book, The Enduring Paradox, and the chapter on modern-day God-fearers, which this young lady wrote. Okay, now.
okay, when Gentiles read the 4 things that are in Acts 15 that they're supposed to follow, only one of them applies now. The other 3 really don't have any application. And I even forgot the one that does apply. Oh, don't be a reprobate. Don't get into all sorts of debauchery. Don't do that. Okay, we can go. The other one's really, one of them is having to do with don't eat meat that was cut off a living animal. What? That was not hypothetical I'm giving you. It was, they used to cut off one leg of the animal and the animal would be having 3 legs, but you'd have nice dinner. God says, don't do that. It's cruel. It's cruel. Don't act in this way. And I even forgot the other 2, but they don't apply to us. We're not hopping off legs and having dinner from one of the legs of an animal. There are ways that God wants us to act and not. And in that list, the only one is don't be debauched. Okay, I'm not. So then I'm in. No. Why even bring those 4 things up if you're just talking about average, ordinary Gentiles on the street? What would these 4 things tell them? They wouldn't even get it. Just, they sing that old timey hymn, just as I am, without one plea. And so they assume that everyone can just come the way they are, and God is so happy with them, and he accepts them, and everything's hunky-dunky then from now on. And all of us know, no, it's not true. No, that's only a small part of what happens after you decide to come to God. Then God says, okay, you know what you're doing over here? That's not good. You know what you did over there? Not good. You know what you did over there? Not good. And so we have to apply that also. But here's the thing, what we don't readily understand, because it's not taught to us, is these Gentiles in Acts 15, the Gentiles that they're speaking to are not guys on the street. These are a special group of Gentiles. What? There was a special group of Gentiles? Oh, yes. During the Roman Empire, there had arisen already a group of Gentile people who were very interested in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember, they'd be mainly worshiping pagan gods, right? During the Roman Empire, no matter what. But they got interested in the God of the Jews because that God seemed very, very good and interesting. And his scholars have even said women were very interested in this God because he was not a God of war. He was a God of love and peace. Didn't say too much about war at all. So people would go to the synagogue. Now, were they blocked from going to the synagogue and somebody stood there and said, "Pass, if you're not Jewish, drop your pants, men. I want to see if you're Jewish." No, this is totally wrong. They were invited into the synagogue to sit and to learn, not to raise their hand and make problems. No, to sit and to learn about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so there was Gentiles and they didn't even get to make them sit in different places that we know about. So they were accepted. If you're there to learn, come right in, enjoy our company, learn to know what we do, learn how we live our life, learn what our considerations about what food is. Remember, it's not that animal's food and that animal's not food. That's not how you would perceive it. It's like, yeah, this is what you can eat. All these other animals, no, not so much. So all these things were learned as they went week by week to the synagogue and learned about the scriptures. Remember, they didn't know anything about that strange scroll that said all these history of the Jewish people. And so they would learn. And this became an actual group that was referred to with an actual name. It wasn't just a hypothetical. They were called God-fearers. And they were not a Gentile on the street who would like kneel down and all of a sudden, God would appear. Maybe that happened, but that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about the group of Gentile people that came to a synagogue because they were interested in following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the pagan gods. And it says, as you study this, and these are Christian scholars who are saying this, many of these people converted formally, but some of them never converted formally, and they can't explain this. Many people converted formally and raised their children to be Jews. And these Jews were accepted because there was a formal conversion. And for the man, the results of the formal conversion are obvious. For the woman, not as obvious on the surface. But you could choose to become fully Jewish, and that was commitment that you could make, but you were not pressured to do that. You didn't have to. And what Yaakov is saying is, we can't pressure them to become Jews. It's wrong to do that. They need to learn all about what we do and why we do it. Remember, he makes that statement. This has been taught in the synagogues for the last, he calls it 500 years. In other words, if a Gentile person is interested in this faith, they need to first learn about it, and then they can be accepted into the faith. We can't just have ignorant people coming from, worshiping Venus or worshiping Baal or whatever they're worshiping, and then just the next day they're in a church, and I'm using that. The next day they're in church, and that's just fine, and we can accept them just the way they are, like the hymn. No. There's this learning process, and I think that's the point. Now, there is also a congregation written about by Rav Shaul, where you see the results of Gentiles coming into a congregation and they don't know what they're doing, and they're just behaving like they used to when they were pagans and non-believers. Maybe you've guessed, all right. It's the place he has to scold them in a very long letter or two because they are behaving abominably. For instance, one of the gentlemen in the congregation is sleeping with his father, who is dead, sleeping with his stepmother. And what does Rav Shaul say? No. Maybe pagans can get away with this. Just no. Well, why would he say that? It's being so strict. They don't do that in other cultures. Yeah, it's in the Tanakh. It's all explained in the early chapters of the Bible, which you haven't learned yet because you're still acting in ignorant Gentile ways. Here's another thing. You're going in to have, the Lord's Supper, which is, Pesach. And you're using the occasion of the 4 cups of wine to get drunk. God says, no. This is wrong. This is not the Jewish way. We're not drinking wine to get drunk. So he's giving you little insights into case studies about why that congregation is so messed up that they haven't learned about or applied what they should have learned about Jewish life and the scriptures into their congregation. And so all the rest of us, no matter if we're Jewish or Gentile or go to a Jewish or Gentile congregation, we need to be aware. No, you can't just do what you want, but you said, just as I am, without a plea. You can only take the metaphor in that hymn so far, and not very far, right? Not very far. Is that adequate enough?
Yeah, I think the main point, one of the main points to remember is that these God-fearers are called that because they had adopted a Jewish lifestyle, whether or not they had converted. If they had converted, they were no longer God-fearers, they were Jews.
Right.
But for the ones who didn't convert, they were called God-fearers, but they had adopted a Jewish lifestyle.
Let me give one final example. So in the book of Acts, in a city that is part of the biblical text, Caesarea, not a Jewish city. It's actually the capital from which Rome ruled Judea. It's actually the Roman city that's within the Holy Land that's not Jewish. It's Roman. And in the middle of Roman city central was a gentleman who was in charge of Roman soldiers. He's in the middle of Gentile city, and he's in the middle of the Roman army culture. His name is Cornelius, and it says Cornelius and his whole family were God-fearers. What does that mean? It means they had happy thoughts about God. No, it means that they followed their Jewish way of life, even though obviously not Jewish. Obviously, he's a commander, I forget of, he's
Centurion.
centurion, so you got a commander of at least 100 soldiers. And it says there were other soldiers there who were serving in the Roman army that were joined with them, that were also God-fearers. Well, how Jewish is this guy if he lives in Gentile Central? He's so Jewish that when it's Jewish prayer time in the afternoon, he prays at the same time the Jews in Jerusalem are praying at the temple. That's how Jewish he was. I don't think any of us are that Jewish. And in that prayer session, an angel comes to him, and what does the angel say? Your prayers have been accepted using the same verb as the burnt offering at the temple was sacrificed. That's what Cornelius's prayers were accepted as, that holy and that Jewish, as a sacrifice at the temple. And God is here and wants to tell you something important. You are a very special person. You need to get more teaching. And what happens with Cornelius? Teachers are sent to him, Jewish teachers. And so we have these, and it's not hidden. He's not hiding. He's not afraid for his life. Him, his family, some other soldiers that serve with him are God-fearers, and teaching is brought to them so they can really start to fit in with a Messianic Jewish lifestyle and possibly start a congregation there in Gentile city. People read the whole story of Cornelius, and because they don't know Greek very well, or they don't like to look at those sentences of the story, they just skip over those. They just think he's a nice guy. No, he's a very special, unique person with a very special, unique group. And that's why God sends godly men to come and teach them more. Because not too many synagogues within the city limits of Caesarea. It turns out the Jewish community lived just on the outskirts south of the actual city. And so there was a Jewish enclave there, but they did not live in the city. Just the same way as Tiberias. There was a Jewish enclave on the outskirts of Tiberias, but they did not live in the city of Tiberias, right? Hello, just
Don't remember.
hear me now and believe me later. Where's the synagogue that we go to in Tiberias, south of town? Right?
That's what I was trying to picture. Maybe
South of town.
Magdala, south.
No, Magdala's north of town. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking about
In Tib-
south of town. We go to that synagogue that they dug up. Trust me. If I had a map here, I'd show you.
Yeah.
Magdala is just north, and
Yeah.
that's a Jewish enclave too.
Yes.
But they don't live, my point is they don't live
Oh,
in
okay.
Tiberias.
Oh, okay. You're talking about the synagogue we used to do, not the one that we most recently did when they found the one in
Correct.
Magdala.
I'm not
Gotcha.
talking
Okay.
about Magdala.
Thank you.
I had forgotten about Magdala, but
All right, I got you.
talking about south of, on the lakes of Kinneret is a synagogue that they dug up and has the you know what is a floor. On the floor.
Yeah.
Of the synagogue. Highly controversial. We're not bringing it up now. We can't tell you all the secrets. Go ahead. I'm done.
Oh, you're done.
I'm
Okay.
waiting.
Okay.
I'm
No,
done.
I think,
Am I done? I'm done.
yeah, I think, yeah. All right. I think, the question sounded pretty simple and straightforward, but it had all yes, I was about to say the same thing. It had all kinds of interesting ramifications that were built into it and tied into it. So we apologize well, no, we dealt with two questions because we dealt with
did that,
Yom
and
HaShoah.
This whole concept of when you use the word circumcised, particularly in the Newer Testament, it doesn't mean what you might think it means, or it means way more than
More,
you might think it
exactly.
means. And it also applies to women. Even though we go, that's terrible. Now, what am I talking about? It's sort of like childbirth with Ben. That was terrible. I noticed you were in pain. I went to get McDonald's. That actually happened with John. I'm in labor. Nurse says to him, why don't you go get some lunch? I remember. I didn't have maternal amnesia about that. I still remember. And of course, that was the same day that the World Series was on. So guess what was on the TV? I like baseball, so that didn't bother me as much. I understood, but the go get McDonald's and she said it right in front of me.
But I should add one other thing in my defense. I was not the only one watching TV.
Yeah,
The attending physician was a baseball. We were both watching
he
TV.
was a big fan because Milwaukee was in the World Series.
So-
Yeah, and I didn't hold it against him because I understood that. In fact, I think he was leaving like within a couple days, like after I gave birth, to go to Milwaukee and
Yeah.
actually see a game in person.
All right.
It's amazing we stayed married after.
Okay, now, I do want to say that one of the other questions, and there were a couple other questions that came in. I'm sorry we didn't get to those. I didn't think,
We have them
We
in the
have 'em.
file.
I'm sorry we didn't get to them. I figured we've given the nature of this question and all that's connected with it, plus the fact that we were going to share some reflections on Yom HaShoah and how we handle this whole issue of God after the Holocaust. The next question we would have dealt with, and we will next time we get together, raises sort of a corollary question what we were just talking about, Passover for the circumcised. Okay, who is considered a Jew? Because this particular person has a very interesting Jewish background. And it has to do with, is it mama or papa? Is it grandma or grandpa? On which side? How many? And so who is and who isn't?
Messianic movement has issues with this too. It
Yeah,
just depends on who you're talking to, what
But-
kind of answer you're gonna get.
but we will get into that next time. So for the person who sent that in, have patience
We
with
love
us.
you.
We will get to it. That's a very important question, especially since for the questioner, it relates directly to his background. So speaking of next time, the next time, according to the newsletter which you
Oh, my calendar.
should have received.
We're looking at our calendars. That's what we're doing. If you want to look at your calendar, this would be a good time.
Okay,
Okay, Rosh Hashanah is on September 20.
no, we're doing it in May.
Oh, sorry. Oh, we are gonna do it in May.
Yeah,
I'm so confused.
the newsletter said we do one more in May.
Okay, one more in May.
Yeah, what we're thinking about is taking the summer off, but before we take the summer off, we will do one more. And it will not be the last Saturday, which is, no, is that?
Last Saturday in May, it's the 31st.
Yeah, okay. We will be doing it the 24th, which is, as it turns out.
No, we have a concert that evening.
Oh,
I just
oh,
changed.
you just changed it. Oh, okay. In that case,
Never mind. And the rabbinic conference
It's
is
the
on the
week before.
17th, so it might have to be the 10th.
yeah, which is not listed in the newsletter. So update your newsletter. It looks like the next one will be,
Too bad I'm here.
yeah. And-
Well, we could do it on the 31st because Memorial Day is the weekend before. That would be an option too.
I'd say,
Well, the first is Shavuot,
yeah,
so the 31st
that would make for a very full
be,
weekend. No, let's do it the 10th.
10th,
Okay. All right.
the
so-
day before Mother's Day. That's okay.
All right.
My kids don't do anything for me anyway. They go, Happy Mother's Day. That's what I get. It's great.
Okay, so I've marked it in my calendar where we will do it May 10th, which is actually 2 weeks from today.
Yeah. It's actually 2 weeks, so we can answer some of these questions
Yes,
and they
we-
won't have forgotten.
And they will not be as far removed as they might have been.
So our Shavuot service is gonna be on
Sunday
Sunday,
night, yes,
Sunday evening.
yes,
Okay.
as you announced it last night.
I don't pay attention to what I'm saying when I'm announcing. I just announce it. I'm not thinking about it.
All right. Okay, so fair enough. So,
Uh,
so we will see all of you, not in 4 weeks, but in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, have a wonderful 2 weeks. And thank you for your patience and for your attention. Let's flip this over to God and then say Shavua Tov. Well, no, we've already flipped it over to God. We'll just close it off.
I'm not participating in that discussion.
Okay, Father, thank you for this opportunity we've had for the interaction, for the questions that were sent in, not only the ones we got to interact with tonight, but the ones we didn't and we'll get to in a couple of weeks. Pray that understanding, deeper understanding will have occurred and will continue to occur because of our conversation together, and that in all of our lives, it will shape our lives and our responses to people, to situations, to each other. And for all this, we're grateful because of Yeshua and because you brought us into your family because of and through him. In Yeshua's name. Amen.
Question.
Yes.
I like things to tie up in sense, and scripture has to always be followed. So, since circumcision is a sign of being part of the family of Abraham, and Gentiles have been grafted in to be part of the family of Abraham, that makes it allowable for us to participate in Passover?
First, let me amplify that a bit. Good question, and I'm glad we didn't cut things off. Circumcision is the sign of being part of the family of Abraham, Isaac,
And Jacob.
Jacob,
And Jacob.
and kids, yes. Because remember, the covenant was made with Abraham, it was ratified to Isaac, and it was ratified to Jacob, not to Ishmael, not to Esau. So, that means that this festival of national identity, I probably should have put it quite that clearly when we first went through it, but
You're talking about circumcision.
Passover.
Oh, Passover, sorry.
This festival of Passover, which is a celebration of national identity, is exactly that, a celebration of national identity. People are always invited to join us. And in fact, very early in the Passover, we say, and for all those who have not, we invite them all because we remember that we were once slaves in Egypt. So although more specifically that's addressed to Jews who are in need, it is said in such a way that others can be invited in to it. But for others who are invited into it, it's not their national celebration of identity. Now, for followers of Yeshua, of course, we remember that Yeshua was identified as the Passover Lamb of God. But the celebration remains as in celebration of national identity for Jews. And of course, it would have included those who've identified with the Jewish community like God-fearers in all practicality.
Well, in all cases, it's very important for us 21st century people to understand it isn't just in my brain
Mhm.
or in my heart or both. It's what do I do? What do I do? Not just, oh, I love God. He doesn't get you in the club. However, I'm not sure that that's clear to a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's not only what you believe, but what you do.
What you live.
And what you live and how you're identified by others.
Yeah. And although what is often called communion or the Lord's Supper is based on the Passover,
It has a different
it
message nowadays.
has a different message and it's a different thing.
It's different.
If you celebrate communion or the Lord's Supper, you are not celebrating Passover. It's derived from Passover, but it's not Passover. If you want to celebrate Passover, you need to celebrate it according to the Haggadah and the Seder at the appropriate time of Passover. And yes, it's a wonderful instrument for helping people who are not Jews better understand the Jewish framework of the faith that they have. But it's only if you become part of the community or attach yourself to the community, is it a celebration of national identity.
Does that make it clearer?
Yes, thank you.
In all cases, I don't think that we sitting, in the year 2025 can point the finger at people and say, well, you didn't do it right, and you didn't do it right, and you didn't do it right, and you didn't, and you're not right, and if we continue to do that, well, you're gonna look at yourself finally and go, I'm not right. Because we cannot continually close people off. And if we continually close people off, then I think that is quenching the spirit.
Yeah. Judaism was always intended to, from the time of Abraham on, to be an inclusive, not an exclusive family, which is why Abraham is noted, according to the traditions, as having brought many people into the family. That was his, what is the term that's used? Skips right through me. Hospitality, that's the term. Abraham was known for his hospitality. And in the Jewish tradition, that hospitality is understood not only to have entertained people, but to have integrated people. Okay. Thank you for a very good follow-up question. We should have asked for questions before we closed. So we call that
TikTok.
we call that an epilogue or a PS.
TikTok.
Yeah.
We started late.
Yeah. Again, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your patience. And we'll see you, not in 4 weeks, but in 2.
Have a good week. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.